who was Rabbi Yisroel Salanter? Again, a brief biography of the man.
Rabbi Yisroel Salanter is, again, a fascinating person because we don't know as much about him as you would suspect. To this day, it's not clear that we have anything that can be conclusively identified as a photograph of how he looked. Some people make various claims, and other people say it's not conclusive. So we don't even know exactly how Rabbi Yisroel Salanter looked. Rabbi Yisroel Salanter was the son of a very prominent Talmid Chacham. So in a sense, in his earliest years, he was raised within the Litvische Torah tradition of the Vilna Gaon in the proximity of Vilna. Salant was a kind of a village or a small town near Vilna. But at a very young age, even before his bar mitzvah, he was inspired by kind of a hidden tzaddik, Rav Zundel of Salant, who was a nister. Rav Zundel was a great Talmid Chacham. He was a Talmid of Rav Chaim of Volozhin, but Rav Zundel made his living as a peddler, as a woodcutter, etc. And most people didn't necessarily pay that much attention to him. But Rabbi Yisrael, little Yisrael, intuited that Rav Zundel was much more than was visible on the surface. And he used to follow him around, and he would notice things about how Rav Zundel would get up at 3 a.m. to shovel the snow or leave food for the widow, doing all sorts of things that nobody would even know that he did. And Rabbi Yisrael was a spy. He was literally spying on him all the time. And at one point, Rav Zundel caught him, and Rav Zundel said to him, Yisrael, you want to serve Hashem, learn Mussar. And those were the words that kind of turned Rabbi Yisrael into a new path in life, in which he defined his role in life, his mission in life, to learn Mussar, absorb the teachings of Mussar, and kind of communicate it to others. They actually say another pivotal story, that he once saw a shoemaker. This may be legend. We don't always know if it's true. He saw a shoemaker stitching together shoes, stitching together the sole to the shoe, and it was getting very, very dark, and he was working by the light of a candle. This is before electricity. And Rabbi Yisrael said, how can you possibly work when it's so dark? And he said, as long as the candle burns, there's work to be done. He said it in Yiddish, and Rabbi Yisrael then said, and the neshama of a person is a candle. Ner Hashem nishmas adam. I got to work. I have to strive. Now, Rabbi Yisrael went through in his own life a number of changes and transformations because he was always looking for the way to serve Hashem and serve Am Yisrael. And it took, although Mussar was always on the agenda, so to speak, but there were different aspects of it. For example, his derech of learning. He was naturally a very brilliant person. Besides being a masmid, he was an Eloi. And initially, he was very much attracted to the idea of pilpul, of bringing together many, many different divergent texts and creating very complicated, very lengthy sequences of logic, which most people couldn't even follow and which overwhelmed people. But he thought that this showed the greatness of Torah, this showed the sweetness of Torah, the depth of Torah, and therefore he went al derech hapilpul. But then later he changed his mind and he said, pilpul is not emes. It may be ingenious, it may be brilliant, it may be a tour de force, but you're not really dealing with solid logic. And therefore he kind of turned into a little bit of what later became known as Rav Chaim's derech, more analytical and logical. But then he changed his mind on that because he said that relies too much on your assumption that your logic is emes. Maybe the Torah is working with a type of transcendental reasoning that may not make sense on the level of your human logic. So he went back to pilpul, different things like that. His family was in the Vilna area, but for most of the year, he would wander from place to place. He had his core of Talmidim in Vilna, who were the great, great Talmidei Chachamim and the great leaders of the Mussar movement in the coming years. But Rabbi Yisrael only was there for a few months a year around the Chagim, etc. A lot of times he wandered through lonely outposts in France and Germany, where there were very, very, very few Orthodox Jews. And he was makar of them before there was an Eish HaTorah.
before there was an Ohr Somayach. He was a one-man kiruv operation to bring Jews to Torah. So he had kind of two different types of missions. Really maybe three missions at least. On one level, he was a Rebbe and a mentor and an inspiration to great, eminent Talmidei Chachamim who were shakua in learning, but he wanted to bring them in midos tovos and yiras Hashem, that they should become gedolim mamish. Right? Those were his Vilna Talmid. And then he wanted to appeal to the simple balabais, who was shomer mitzvos, who could not open up a Gemara, but he wanted that person too to grow in avodas Hashem, and that's why the Mussar movement was also had a populist bent to kind of get the average person involved in the Mesilas Yesharim. And then finally, there was a kiruv rechokim bent, in which he went to places where there literally were few, if any, Orthodox Jews. So he had, in some ways, a sad life. I'm not sure he would describe it that way, because most of the time he was separated from his family, his wife and children. Most of the time he was separated from a community that could truly understand him and his depth. And it is also said that he himself suffered from depression that he sometimes spoke about. We don't really know all the details about that. He did die in, I think it was Paris, or at least in France, in abject poverty, having nothing at all. And there's even a tradition, some of these stories, we don't know if they're true, but there's a tradition that he was dying in the presence of an old man with whom he shared a room. And when he sensed that the old man was afraid to be in the room with the dying man, Rabbi Yisroel spent his last moments on earth reassuring the person that a corpse is only a corpse. It's nothing to be scared about. His very death was bracketed within an act of loving kindness and an act of chesed. So he was a very, very extraordinary person. Basically, he wrote very little. We have a few things that he wrote, some of the Or Yisrael, some of letters and the like. Most of what we know about him, lahavdil, as what we know of Socrates is really from Plato. So lahavdil, much of what we know about Yisroel Salanter is not from Yisroel Salanter himself, but from his Talmidim, Rav Vitzel Petterberger, that's Rav Yitzhak Blazer, Rav Natali Amsterdam, the Alter of Kelm, who was the Talmud Muvak at the Alter of Slobodka. And we kind of know Rabbi Yisrael from the Talmidim that he produced. He was a very, very private person. He did not talk about himself that much. He did not even reveal everything that was going on inside of him. The famous statement, not everything you think you should say, and not everything you say you should write, not everything you write you should print, that actually originated from Rabbi Yisroel Salanter himself. So as famous as he was in some ways, it was the tip of the iceberg. 99% of him was concealed, and that was by design. But as I say, looking at his Talmidim who became more prominent in some ways, we can get a sense of the greatness of this person.